Now, Proverbs 25 begins with a little bit of an intro. These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. Now, as you can see, Hezekiah is right down here. He's the 13th king after Solomon's death. And it would be over 250 to about 270 years later that they would find these other writings of Solomon, and Hezekiah would incorporate them into the Proverbs in which they already had at the time. And just one more thing to note, you'll notice how there was Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, and then Ahaz. And under Ahaz, he was a wicked king of the Jews at that time. And then there was this revival that happened at Hezekiah's time. So how convenient was it for there to be a revival after 16 years of a wicked king? So on to verse 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. And this really brings me back to what Jesus said, Father, I thank thee that you have not revealed these things, these secrets of creation unto the learned men, those in whom have all the scholarly types. We would see them as the university professors and everything, but unto babes. You reveal them unto the simple, those in whom seek you out with all their heart. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, these mysteries. This has been understood as referring to the revelation of God's will in His Word, where there are many things concealed in parables, allegories, metaphors, similitudes, etc. And it is becoming the majesty of God so to publish His will that it must be seriously studied to be understood. Study to show thyself approved, and do know that there is a reward to those in whom diligently seek these things out. Notice what Adam Clarke continues on. The Bible must be seriously studied to be understood in order that the truth may be more prized when it is discovered. So it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, to have mysteries, and only give unto those in whom diligently seek them out. But it is also the honor of kings to search out a matter. And probably in its most immediate context, it is speaking of literal kings of the earth. But we know how very few of those in whom get into government are not like King David or even like Solomon. So very few actually search out the matter to find out the secrets of God's creation. But this may also be referring to those in whom are kings in spirit. Jesus says, I make of ye kings and priests. Verse 3, the heaven for height and the earth for depth, and the heart of kings is unsearchable. This is a possible warning against thinking that one knows the true mind and will and heart of a king outside of God. Verse 4, take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth the vessel for the finer. And in case you're wondering what verse 4 is alluding to, well, verse 5 follows up with that. Take away the dross from the silver. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness. So just like dross is taken from silver, so should the wicked be taken from a king. Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better it is that it be said unto thee, come up here, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince whom thine eyes have seen. And if you'll remember, Jesus teaches the very same lesson, that of not desiring to be seated among all the great men, but rather it's far greater for those great men to call you up to them. Verse 8, go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. And what this is publicly being shamed, being proven wrong in a matter. It's far better to hold in your thoughts and then to learn to forgive your neighbor against any kind of apparent trespass that they have committed against you, instead of just acting hastily upon it, and then all of a sudden you find out that you're wrong and it's publicly known. At that point you're put to shame. Verse 9, debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thine infamy turn not away. So what is possibly being taught right here? Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another. And I agree with Ellicott in this. It may mean If you must go to law with another, do not drag others into the matter by disclosing their secrets in order to help your cause, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame and thine infamy turn not away. Which means that suddenly you'll have a reputation for telling secrets that others entrusted unto you. You're a treacherous man at that time. Verse 11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver, as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. Now this apples of gold and pictures of silver, they think that this was an ornament that Solomon may have been looking at, that he may have received as a gift. But either way, he's likening such a treasure to that of a word fitly spoken, so a proper word at the proper moment. As the coat of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to them that send him. For he refresheth the soul of his master. Now this is not literally talking about snow at the time of harvest. That would have been burdensome. It's much more believed that this is talking about snow that they would gather from the mountains of Lebanon, possibly, and bring it down in order to be like ice for their drinks, a refreshing beverage. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. Now this is talking about those in whom proclaim publicly that they're going to give a good gift, like to charity or to the homeless. Politicians do this a lot. Oh, I'm going to give to the poor and we're going to help the needy and all that. And they never come through with it. They talk of false gifts. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. And Cambridge commented on this verse 15, we have an illustration of this proverb in the effect of the long forbearing of David during his persecution by Saul, and of his soft tongue at Engedi, 1 Samuel 24, and in the wilderness of Ziph. Remember how David said, look, I could have killed you, but I didn't. And then Saul, he seems rather at ease for that moment. Is this the voice of my son David? And such can be the same in the case if you have an enemy, an adversary coming against you, just bear with them for as long as it takes, and they'll eventually probably be worn down or out of your presence. Now verse 16, hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith and vomit it. Which is, of course, a teaching on moderation. Eat honey, but don't eat too much. Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee. This is talking about not wearing out your welcome. Don't just linger in somebody's home. They have stuff to do. A man that beareth false witness against his neighbor is a maul, and a sword, and a sharp arrow. Now, once again, they brought false witnesses at the trial of Christ. And it's talking about how such false witnesses come forward, and just like at Nabal and Jezebel and Ahab, how Ahab wanted his vineyard, and then they brought these false witnesses. Well, it wound up costing Nabal his life, and he was a completely innocent man. And just as the proverb says, such false witnesses can be like the deadliest instruments. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. What good is a broken tooth? I mean, you can't chew with it. What good is a foot out of joint? You can't walk on it. And the same amount of unreliability is in the case of an unfaithful man in time of trouble. You can't rely upon them. As he that taketh away a garment in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre, so is he that singeth songs to a heavy heart. Jameson Fawcett Brown summarized it like this: not only is the incongruity of songs that is joyful, and sadness meant how they don't mix. Don't sing a joyful song to a very sad person. But an accession of sadness by want of sympathy is implied, meaning that such an unsympathetic gesture will not only not help the person, but it will actually make the situation worse, like taking away someone's garment or their coat in cold weather. Now for one of the more known and rarely understood proverbs. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. Now what is meant by this coals of fire upon their head? Thou shalt make him burn with shame at the thought of the wrong he has done thee. Thus to bring a sinner to repentance is well pleasing to the Lord, who shall reward thee for it. Verse 23, the north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance, a backbiting tongue. And this one is very obvious. It just means that just as the wind pushes out the rain, so will an angry countenance put fear into that of a slanderer. It is better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. Once again, Solomon has repeated this same thing. But do keep in mind, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He was well aware of just how upsetting that a wife coming against you and yelling and screaming and all of that. He was well aware of, and he probably had that on a constant basis, really. So he probably spent a lot of time on the rooftop. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. Now, what does verse 26 mean? A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. Ellicott put it like this: if the righteous man yields to the pressure put upon him by the wicked, and through fear or favor gives up his principles, then he can no longer give forth counsel out of a pure heart. He becomes like a fountain which has been fouled by the feet of cattle. Verse 27, it is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. And that's implying someone in whom has no defense, no hedge about them against all the evil coming at them. So they're like a city without walls because they have no rule over their own spirit. They walk in the flesh constantly, and Christians do this, really can fall into this very, very easily. And then suddenly that hedge is brought down, and they're wondering why they have so many troubles coming upon them as Christians.